Welcome to the EBPOT podcast with your host, Kim Griffin. Hi everyone, and welcome to the EBPOT podcast, where I help you stay up to date with the current research in paediatric occupational therapy. My name is Kim Griffin. I'm a paediatric occupational therapist and your host. Today the focus is 2 articles presenting the results from treatment studies exploring the use of occupational performance coaching. For those unfamiliar with OPC, it's a collaborative, strengths-based coaching approach that focuses on 3 key domains: connect, structure, and strength. The core idea is that instead of doing things to families, we work with them to help them to solve their own problems through guided reflection and collaborative analysis. OPC has been developed by Fee Graham at Otago University, and unlike other coaching approaches, OPC has a clear fidelity measure which helps people using OPC to know whether they are adhering to the core principles of OPC or not. I've included the link to the OPC website in the show notes, and you can find these on the EBPOT website, and the website address is ebpot.com. If you're already on the mailing list, you will have received the direct link to this episode in your inbox already, and if you're not, please do subscribe. That way, next fortnight, you'll also receive the show notes when the podcast is released. The first study I'm presenting today is by Ty Frater and colleagues, published in the British Journal of Occupational Therapy in September 2025. The full title is Acceptability and Feasibility of Online Occupational Performance Coaching for Parents of Children with Disabilities in the UK. These researchers wanted to explore whether occupational performance coaching could work effectively when delivered online to UK families. Much of the existing research focuses on OPC in person, and in a post-COVID world where many services have developed their online arm, it is important to understand whether existing treatments can transfer online and still achieve outcomes. The researchers were aiming to answer the following 3 questions. How acceptable is the coaching program to parents and therapists in the United Kingdom? How feasible is the coaching program delivery for parents and therapists in the United Kingdom? And what changes occurred in parent-reported occupational performance and satisfaction measures and parenting levels of stress? This was a mixed methods feasibility study, so the researchers combined quantitative outcome measures with qualitative interviews to get the full picture. To address the first research question, they interviewed parents and completed focus groups with occupational therapists. To address the second study aim, they reviewed video recordings of the coaching sessions using the COPM fidelity measure, and they also reviewed case notes and training information. The Canadian Occupational Performance Measure and the Parenting Stress Index were used to evaluate child and parent progress pre- and post-sessions. The COPM was completed in the first and last sessions, and the parents completed the stress index in their own time and returned it to the team. 8 families in the UK took part in this trial between April and July 2021. These families were recruited through social media and the university website. The parents' ages ranged from 35 to 53 years old, and their children were aged from 2 to 13 years. 5 of the 8 children were autistic, which probably reflects what we're seeing clinically on many of our own caseloads. All of the families completed the full intervention, but only 6 of the parents participated in the interviews following the intervention. The parents received between 4 to 8 coaching sessions via video conferencing, with each session lasting around 49 minutes on average. The coaching was delivered by 4 experienced paediatric OTs who received 8 hours of online OPC training plus additional mentoring throughout the study period. The findings were really encouraging from multiple perspectives. Parents reported positive experiences with the coaching. In interviews, they described it as a shared journey where they felt supported to break down overwhelming challenges into manageable steps. One parent captured their experience by saying, "It was like I reached my goals by myself, but I knew I didn't do it by myself." Parents were also really positive about the online delivery. They valued the autonomy it gave them over the timing and location, and many mentioned how much time it saved compared to travelling to appointments. One parent noted on how being in their own space also reduced their anxiety. They liked having their cat in their lap and they didn't have to worry about tidying up for visitors. The parents also reported positive changes to the family as a whole following the intervention. The main views from therapists were that the benefits of delivering coaching via telehealth outweighed the challenges, and they valued having support from mentors to deliver the coaching approach. This feedback supports other research that suggests that one-off training doesn't necessarily give professionals the skills they need to implement interventions or approaches, and receiving ongoing support with practical application is valuable. In terms of fidelity, despite the therapists reporting that they valued the support they received from their mentors, the fidelity of interventions of the sessions ranged from 43 to 81%, with an average rating of 64%. So that's when it's being measured on the OPC fidelity measure. And to meet fidelity on the measure, a score of 80% or more is recommended. However, other research has shown that it is difficult to meet this 80%, and only 25% of sessions in other work are meeting this benchmark. So although the therapist didn't meet fidelity of delivery, this is not uncommon. However, it does mean that the results need to be interpreted with some caution, as technically the therapists were not delivering all aspects of OPC with fidelity. For the COPM scores post-intervention, they showed a statistically significant improvement in both the occupational performance and the satisfaction scores. The mean improvement was 3.29 for performance and 3.99 for satisfaction. There was a big range with the scores, with some families increasing by only 1 point and others increasing by 5 or 6 points. So that's sort of demonstrating that some families felt that they'd really improved with their goals, whereas others felt that there was not as much of a change. And if you listened to the podcast last week on the Canadian Occupational Performance Measure, we know that there is a variance in what is both a clinically and a statistically significant change in performance and satisfaction scores. If you didn't listen to last week's episode, I'd recommend going to the ebpot.com website or to the EBPOT podcast in your app, and it's episode 2. 6 of the parents also showed reduced stress levels, with the biggest improvements in the parental distress subscale on the parenting stress index. So the intervention did show a reduction in parenting stress as well. So what are the practical takeaways? This study provides emerging evidence that online occupational performance coaching could be a valuable addition to our toolkit, particularly for supporting families to help with self-care skills at home. The sample size was small, but this is very normal with initial research, and a larger sample, ideally with a control group, would be needed to fully validate the results. The study provides more evidence that it is hard to meet fidelity for OPC. This may be because as OTs with many years of experience, we are used to providing supports and solutions, and many of our parents also come expecting us to provide them with some support and some solutions. So there is a shift required from both therapists and parents to establish that collaborative coaching approach. For me, one of the biggest takeaways from this study is the acceptability of online support with parents. This also makes sense from a practical perspective, particularly in rural areas or for parents who are juggling school pickups and work and household responsibilities. Reducing travel time for appointments would be a really big help for these families. So if you need to justify the use of online approaches with parents or to managers, this study gives you some great evidence for that. The second study today also focuses on occupational performance coaching. It's part of Sue Allen's PhD work, and it was published in Physical and Occupational Therapy in Paediatrics in July 2025. The article is called Brief Online Group Coaching for Mothers of Children with Sensory Differences, a Pilot Study. This is a really timely piece of research that addresses something many of us are grappling with in practice. How do we effectively support families when resources are stretched? Sue wanted to see whether occupational performance coaching, which is usually used as a one-to-one approach, could work when delivered to groups of parents. The intervention specifically looked at using occupational performance coaching with mothers of children with sensory differences using an online approach. The team was interested to understand whether a group format could maintain the benefits of OPC whilst potentially reaching more families and building in the peer support element that groups can also offer. The team had 3 aims for this pilot study. First, they wanted to explore whether the group intervention format was actually acceptable to families. So would mothers actually engage with it, and would they find it helpful? Second, they aimed to evaluate whether there were changes in the children's occupational performance following the intervention. And third, they wanted to investigate the impact on maternal stress and mothers' sense of competency of the participating mothers post-intervention. This was a pre- and post-test study design, so no control group, which the authors acknowledged as a limitation. They collected outcome measures 1 week before the intervention and 2 weeks after. Mothers were recruited via social media and from 2 special needs parenting groups between August 2021 and March 2022. They used the sensory processing measure home form to confirm that the children of the mothers involved in the study did experience sensory processing differences. For outcome measures, they used the Canadian Occupational Performance measure, and each mother identified 3 child occupational goals that they were planning to work on over the intervention. The Parenting Stress Index short form was used to measure parents' stress levels. This assessment gives subscales for parenting distress, parent-child dysfunctional interaction, and difficult child behaviours, plus a total stress score. They looked at maternal sense of competence using the Parent Sense of Competency scale, which captures satisfaction and efficacy in the parenting role. They also collected qualitative feedback through semi-structured questionnaire, asking mothers about their experience of the format, what was helpful, and what could be improved. The researchers recruited 11 mothers. All of the children scored with sensory differences on the sensory processing measure, and most of them had co-occurring diagnoses. 73% were autistic, 55% had ADHD, and 55% had anxiety. Only 1 child had no formal diagnosis. The mean age of the children was 8 years old, and the mothers themselves had varied educational backgrounds, and about a quarter of them were single parents. So for the intervention, the mothers were divided into 2 groups of, the first was with 5 and the second was with 6 participants. Before the group session started, each mother had an individual session to complete the pre-assessment, set goals, and to get orientated to the process. Then the mothers attended 4 group sessions, each lasting 90 minutes, delivered via Zoom over 4 weeks, and these were delivered by the primary author, who's a very experienced occupational therapist who was also trained in occupational performance coaching. Like the first study, the occupational performance coaching fidelity measure was used to review the fidelity of the delivery, and a fidelity of 72 to 74% was reached. The researchers were thoughtful about adapting OPC for the group context. They established clear confidentiality boundaries from the start and created what they describe as a safe space for mothers to share. They emphasized throughout that mothers were the experts on their own families, and the group wasn't about telling them what to do, but to enable them to find their own solutions. Each session followed the OPC structure, where mothers would share updates on their goals, engage in reflective questioning to analyze situations, and to identify steps for the coming weeks. The additional benefit of the group format was that other mothers could share their experience related to goals being discussed, and that added a peer learning element to the coaching. After the 4 sessions, the post-assessments were completed by a different occupational therapist to reduce bias in the results. So, what were the results? The attendance to the sessions was excellent. Attendance was 89% across all sessions, and when mothers couldn't attend, it was due to practical barriers like medical appointments or Wi-Fi issues, not disengagement. All 9 mothers who completed the feedback forms rated the usefulness of the group as a 10 out of 10. They also felt it would be useful for other parents, again rating a 10 out of 10, and that's pretty compelling. In their qualitative feedback, mothers said that they valued the shared experience and social support of the group format. One mother commented, problem solving with other people was invaluable. Having dedicated time to talk and then a time frame to action the points discussed and feedback gave me the spur that I needed. Another said of the group format that everyone gave space for others to share, and I don't think that there is a better way. Like the other study, the online format worked well for everyone. There was also some feedback that it was important that it was a sensory-focused group, with one mother commenting that she really related to everything the other parents were talking about because sensory was her biggest challenge. She said she didn't need to know that her child had ASD, but she really needed help with the sensory. And that was the piece that she valued in the group, the fact that it focused on sensory needs. The parents also reported that they would like more follow-up sessions, which suggests that they found the group coaching helpful. The goals the mothers set covered the full range of occupations we would usually see in practice. These included things like participation in meals, washing, self-regulation, school skills, toileting, sleep, dressing, chores, travel, play with others, and swimming. The average Coppan performance scores increased from 2.72 to 4.94, and satisfaction scores increased from 2.18 to 5.12. 58% of the goals had an increase of 2 points or more on performance, and 70% had the same for satisfaction. These changes were also statistically significant, meaning it's unlikely they occurred by chance. Again, we need to remember it's a small sample size without a control group, which makes it harder to know if the change was definitely the intervention. However, the results demonstrated that after just 4 sessions, over half of the goals set by mothers showed meaningful improvement in the child's ability to complete these occupations. For the maternal stress scores, the results are more nuanced. 3 of the 4 parenting stress index subscales showed statistically significant improvement. The total stress scores improved but didn't quite reach statistical significance. What's clinically significant, though, is that 6 of the mothers reported reduced total stress, and 4 of them moved out of the clinically significant range, so from above the 90th percentile to below the 80th percentile. Within the limitations, the authors discussed that the newer version of the scale has more robust validity and reliability, so that should be used in future studies. In my mind, we also can't account for everything in a family's life, so there could have been other things happening at the same time that could increase parental stress, which was completely unrelated to the intervention. For maternal competence, this is where the results diverged from previous one-to-one occupational performance coaching studies. The parental sense of competency scores showed improvement but didn't reach statistical significance. The authors suggest this might indicate that something about the brief, group, or online nature of the intervention didn't quite provide the right context to address maternal sense of competency. However, although the questionnaire scores did not reflect significant change, during the feedback interviews, mothers described positive changes in confidence and perspective. One mother said, "I didn't think I was doing enough, and the intervention made me feel a lot better about myself, which impacts how I'm able to support my children." And another mentioned that the group put into perspective that she wasn't doing enough to enable her child to be independent with self-care, and that she needed to take a step back. So whilst the quantitative measure didn't capture change, there were shifts in how mothers perceived themselves. So what are the practical takeaways? First, this study suggests that group-based coaching can be an effective way to support families while managing our time constraints. The researchers calculated that this intervention required about 3 hours of clinical time per mother, compared to 6.5 hours in a recent one-to-one telehealth OPC study. So if you're juggling large caseloads, we know that time efficiency matters, so the group coaching approach might be a helpful way to manage wait lists. Second, the online format worked. All of the mothers in this study found it acceptable, and the outcomes were comparable to in-person individual coaching. This opens up possibilities for families who might struggle with in-person attendance, whether it's due to work commitments, childcare challenges, or geographical barriers. Third, the peer support element seemed to be genuinely valuable to parents. Mothers didn't just benefit from working on their own goals, they gained ideas and felt validated by hearing others' experiences. One mother specifically mentioned that even when somebody else's goal wasn't her focus, she still got ideas from listening. That's an added benefit you don't get in one-to-one work. Fourth, the sensory focus mattered to families. The quote I mentioned earlier about not being told about the autism diagnosis but needing help with their sensory issues, it really resonates with me. Most families are living with the daily reality of how sensory differences affect participation, and they need support with the practical strategies. So, like the first study, this paper indicated that online coaching using occupational performance coaching can help families to achieve their goals. The group format had the added benefit of creating a peer network, and it is a cost-effective use of therapist time. Thanks for listening today. I hope you've enjoyed the episode. If you are listening, please let me know by subscribing to the podcast. And you can also receive notifications of new episodes and the links to the show notes if you join my mailing list at ebpot.com. The website also includes the information on the live journal clubs. The next one will be on the 27th of January, and I'd love to see you there. I'll be back in 2 weeks focusing on autism. I have another article exploring online coaching with families of autistic children and an article focusing on how families accommodate sensory needs. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to share the podcast with another paediatric OT who you think would find it helpful. This podcast provides educational commentary and analysis of recent research for continuing professional development. All studies are properly cited and used under the fair use provisions for educational purposes. Listeners should consult the original sources for complete study details.